One of my earliest childhood memories is standing at the front door of the house we were living at, dressed for Sunday church, watching my dad drive down the street, and I was crying because I so badly wanted to go with him. For some reason, I don't know the reasoning behind it, I was not allowed to go. So I was at home with my mom. I was probably only about 3 or 4 at the time, but it's just one of those memories. I do remember going to church with my dad. And then by the time I was about 5 or 6, my mom and dad got divorced. And the only time that we went to church is if we were with our dad. Now, he was a Lutheran. So on Sunday mornings, we would go to a Lutheran church in the morning, and then there was always some sort of picnic in the afternoon. And then also on Wednesday night, there was something that we would go to. And I remember it so vividly, but when I was 9 years old, my stepdad adopted us, and neither he nor my mother went to church. So because we weren't allowed to see our dad anymore, once the adoption took place, there was no more church for me. So there were a few times growing up that I would go to church with some friends. I know that I'd been to a Catholic church and just, like something other than a Catholic church. And I, at that time, I couldn't even tell you what it was. And then I joined the military, and you had to stay in the dorms unless you had base lib to go around or to go out. But on Sundays, you could go to a church service. And so I thought, well, the church service would be preferable to sitting in the dorm. Now, I was not raised by my mother at all to believe that there was God, but we weren't discouraged from that belief either. It's just, we did say a dinner prayer. So we would say a prayer at dinner time, and that was it. There was nothing else. I didn't know who Jesus was. I just had no conception of anything that I can recall. But while I was in the military, I went to each service that they had, and Baptist and Lutheran, evangelical, and even the Catholic Mass, just to see what they were all about. But I wasn't particularly pulled in any direction to go to any of those. And then you kind of fast forward through life, and things happen, and periodically, I would get this calling to go to church. And I can remember that calling in Albuquerque, it was really kind of there. And I'm like, I don't really get this. So I would go to church occasionally. But, when you don't really know what's going on, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, and you don't know anyone, you just kind of lose interest pretty quickly. And then time goes on, and again, I've visited different churches and things like that. Well, when I lived in Houston, I had a friend from high school contact me, and we messaged back and forth on email for a while, and then he called me one night, and we chatted for a long time, caught up over the years and things like that. And then the next week he called me, and so he was just calling me each week. So like the second week though, he said, "Hey, do you go to church?" And I said, "No." And he asked why not, and I said, I just don't. It wasn't, I didn't go to church. I didn't care if anyone else went to church, but I didn't feel like I needed to be going to church. So that's not something that I did. Well, he started telling me about this church that he belonged to, and he said, you really should go to church sometime. And then he kind of started nagging about it a little bit, and he was calling every week. So one week he calls, and he's like, "Hey, did you go to church on Sunday?" And I said, "I did not." And he's like, "I really wish you would." Now, as part of my personality, I didn't really particularly want to go to church, but I also didn't want him nagging me about it either. So I'm like, "All right, Michael, I'll go to church if that'll make you happy." So I look up in the phone book. We had phone books back then. I look up in the phone book, and I find this church. It's just this little Bible church. It was probably a perfect starting point for me because it was not big. But I didn't realize until Sunday when I went that it was Easter. And in my head, I was like, oh, I don't want to go in there on Easter because lots of people are going to be there. And to be quite honest, I didn't really know what Easter was. We celebrated Easter and Christmas growing up, but I didn't know what they meant because I was never taught what they were meant. Anyway, um, so I go to church. I'm like, you got to go because you promised Michael. So, I get out and I walk up to the church, and there's two guys there, these two greeters and everything. And the one comes up and he says, "Welcome." And he gives me a big hug. And I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And the other guy greets me, and then he takes me in and he's like, "Oh, I'll just introduce you to some of the women." And I thought, well, this is kind of nice because then I don't feel like I'm alone or anything. And it was a nice service. So we talked for a long time, and then the pastor kind of got us under control, and then we did a lot of singing. We sang for a long time, and then he gave his sermon, which lasted about an hour. And I was like, wow, that was a long time. Anyway, so when I talking to Michael, and I said, yes, I went. And, he said, "Oh, I'm so happy for you. Are you going to go back?" And I said, yeah, I could probably go back. So I went back, and, I was taking my daughter with me, and they had children's church. So she was going to children's church. She was really enjoying it. And now fast forward about a year later, I had met this guy on the internet, and we were chatting, and I lived in Texas. He lived in Iowa. And we had been chatting and getting closer. Well, I flew up to meet him, and we had a great time, and we just kind of decided that I would move up. So my daughter and I moved up to Iowa, and this gentleman, and he did become my husband, but he was handicapped, so he couldn't get to church all on his own. So I would take him to Sunday church. And it was kind of awful because I'm like, this is so boring. I didn't know anything that was going on. I didn't understand anything about the missal. And then, he wasn't any help in showing me, how to use the missals, because he couldn't use a missal anyway. Even if he could have, he would have dropped it on the floor or whatever. But anyway, I did this for a few months. And then I finally said to him, you know what? I'll take you to Mass on Sunday or Saturday afternoon. But then I'm going to go find a real church on Sunday because I'm not comfortable here. I in those 3 months, I had met no one. Like, no one had said hello or anything like that. And not only was that not what I was used to in this other church, that's just not me. I talk to people. And so when people don't talk to you, I think it's, especially when it's their home per se, I just think it's a little bit weird. Anyway, so I started doing that. And I think I went to every church in that town. And I found a couple places that I liked, but it just seemed to be a little lacking. But I was going to Catholic Mass every Saturday. And I was slowly starting to pick things up and figure some things out. And that is what began my journey into the Catholic Church. So I'll add a little bit more later, but I think that's enough for now, just to kind of introduce myself a little bit. And my name is Trina, by the way. I probably should have said that at the beginning. But anyway, I just want to start sharing my story because I think sometimes it can be helpful for other people to hear what other people go through. So, I certainly was not born Catholic. I wasn't taken to church much as a child. As a small child I was, but definitely not as I grew older. So, going to church was not part of my upbringing. But anyway, I will share more the next time I post a video. So I hope you're having a good evening, and I'll talk to you soon. And God bless.